The Bodyguard Who Fell for His Target's Sister. In Part 1, The Bodyguard Who Fell for His Target's Sister. Part 2, after the brief silence of the last few days, Mark found himself at the edge of something bigger than himself. The quiet moments he shared with Emma replayed in his mind like a haunting melody. Every smile she gave him, every laugh that slipped through her lips, reminded him just how much he was drawn to her. But he was still her bodyguard. He couldn't forget that, no matter how much his heart pushed him to. That night, as he sat on his balcony overlooking the city, his phone buzzed. It was Emma, asking if he could meet her for dinner. He hesitated for only a moment before his fingers quickly typed a response. Of course. When Mark arrived at the restaurant, the air between them was different. There was a new tension, a quiet understanding that they both knew something had shifted, but neither dared to say it out loud. Emma looked beautiful, even more so than usual. Her usual carefree smile was tinged with something deeper now, something Mark couldn't quite put his finger on. She stood up when she saw him, her eyes lighting up with warmth, but underneath that, Mark could sense a flicker of uncertainty. As he pulled out her chair, she spoke first. Mark, do you think this whole thing is strange? I mean, you're just supposed to protect me, right? Not be a part of my life like this. Her voice was soft, vulnerable. He sat down across from her, not knowing exactly how to respond. His role was simple, protect her. But that was before he started falling for her. Before he noticed how her eyes sparkled when she talked about her dreams. Before he realized that she was no longer just a job to him. I don't think it's strange, Mark said, his voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. It's complicated. But maybe it doesn't have to be strange. Maybe it's just real. He paused, his words hanging between them like a fragile thread. Emma looked at him for a long moment, her gaze intense, searching. Then, her lips curled into a soft smile. I don't know if I believe in that kind of real, she said, leaning back in her chair. I mean, what does it even mean? Being real with someone you barely know. Mark found himself captivated by her words, the way her doubts mirrored his own. He had always kept his emotions in check, focusing solely on the mission. But now, in her presence, everything was different. He wanted to protect her, not just from danger, but from the loneliness he saw in her eyes. As they ate, the conversation flowed effortlessly. They talked about everything. Their favorite movies, their childhood memories, the strange twists life had thrown their way. Emma's smile seemed more genuine now, her guard slipping with each word. Mark found himself laughing, something he hadn't done in a long time. But even amidst the easy conversation, he couldn't ignore the growing tension between them. Later, as they walked out of the restaurant together, Emma looked up at the stars, her expression distant. Mark noticed the way she seemed to shrink into herself, a sudden cloud passing over her face. Mark, she said quietly, her voice tinged with sadness. I don't know if I can keep living like this. Being protected all the time. It's like I'm suffocating. I never asked for this life, this wealth. I just wanted to be normal. Her vulnerability hit him harder than he expected. He reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder, offering her a sense of reassurance he didn't know how to give. I understand, he said softly. You're not alone in this, Emma. You don't have to do everything on your own. They stood there for a moment, the city lights twinkling around them. For the first time, Mark allowed himself to feel what he had been holding back for so long. A pull, a connection that was undeniable. He wasn't just her bodyguard anymore. He was something else, and it was terrifying. The following days were filled with moments like that. Tiny exchanges that seemed innocent but carried the weight of everything unsaid. And Mark found himself at a crossroads. He couldn't keep pretending that he was just her protector. He was falling for her, and as the days went on, it became more and more impossible to ignore. One night, as Mark sat in his apartment, staring at the phone in his hand, he received a call from Henry Parker, Emma's brother. The sound of his voice was as cold and calculated as ever. Mark, I need to speak with you about Emma. I don't trust the people she's been spending time with lately. Keep an eye on her. Make sure nothing happens. Mark's grip on the phone tightened. His duty was clear. But the thought of Emma in danger, of her being used as a pawn in her brother's business world, made his blood boil. I'll protect her, Henry. But she's not a pawn, Mark replied, his voice hard, a sharp edge cutting through the calm. As soon as the call ended, Mark's mind raced. He wasn't just going to protect Emma from danger. He was going to protect her from the life she had been born into. And in doing so, he realized he was protecting something else, too. His heart. Stay tuned to see how Mark and Emma's complicated relationship continues to unfold. Will Mark stay true to his mission, or will he let his feelings for Emma take over? Find out next time. In Part 2, the bodyguard who fell for his target's sister. Part 3, the days that followed were filled with an uneasy tension. Mark found himself watching Emma even more closely, not because it was his job, but because he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Henry's warning still echoed in his mind. Keep an eye on her. Make sure nothing happens. But Mark knew that the danger wasn't just from the outside world. It was the one they were both pretending didn't exist, the bond that was quietly forming between them. Emma, on the other hand, seemed more distant than usual. She still laughed and talked about her dreams of starting her own art studio, but there was something behind her eyes that Mark couldn't ignore. The weight of her family's empire, the responsibilities she never asked for, hung over her like a storm cloud. One evening, as Mark was returning from a routine check on the property, he found Emma sitting in the garden, staring at the stars. He hesitated for a moment before walking over to her, his footsteps soft against the grass. She didn't look up, but she didn't need to. He could tell she was lost in thought. "You okay?" Mark asked gently, standing just a few feet away. Emma slowly turned her head, her eyes searching his face. There was a softness there now, something different from the guarded woman he'd met weeks ago. She smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I don't know anymore, Mark," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of everything she hadn't said before. "I feel like I'm losing myself. My brother, my family, they all want something from me, but they never ask if I want any of it." Mark felt a pang in his chest. He couldn't imagine the kind of pressure she was under. He had his own battles, but this was something entirely different. "I get it," he replied, his voice low, filled with understanding. "You don't have to do this alone." Emma's gaze softened, but there was a vulnerability in her eyes that Mark had never seen before. It made his heart race, and for a moment, he forgot to breathe. He wanted to say more, to reach out, but he held back, the professional walls he had carefully built around himself still standing tall. "I don't want to be alone anymore," she whispered, almost to herself. It was a confession, a quiet, heartbreaking plea for help that Mark knew he couldn't ignore. Without thinking, he stepped closer, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw her as someone who wasn't just the target's sister or the woman he was assigned to protect. She was Emma, someone who had her own dreams and fears. "You're not alone," Mark said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm right here." She didn't pull away, and for a moment, the world outside them seemed to disappear. They were just two people, standing in the quiet of the garden, sharing something unspoken. The next day, the storm hit. A business deal her brother had been working on for months suddenly went wrong, and Emma found herself thrust into the chaos. Mark was by her side in an instant, always ready, always watching. But as the situation escalated, Mark began to realize that the threats against Emma weren't just business-related, they were personal. Someone in her own circle wanted her gone, and Mark couldn't ignore the feeling that she was being used as a pawn in a much larger game. By the time they returned to the mansion that evening, Emma was exhausted, her eyes hollow from the stress of the day. Mark stayed close, watching her carefully, but he couldn't stop the gnawing feeling in his gut. Someone was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. As they entered the mansion, Emma turned to him, her expression soft but serious. "Mark, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Mark looked at her, concern filling his chest. "What is it?" "I think I know who's behind all this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's my brother's business partner. I've seen the way he looks at me, the way he's been manipulating Henry. I think he's trying to take everything from us, including me." Mark's heart sank as the realization hit him like a freight train. He had always known that Emma's life was more complicated than he realized. But this was worse than he imagined. "We need to get out of here," he said urgently, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the door. "Now." But Emma stopped him, her eyes filled with resolve. "No," she said firmly, her voice growing stronger. "I'm not running anymore. I'm not going to let him take everything I've worked for. I'm going to fight." She turned to face him, her gaze steady, unwavering. Mark stood frozen, torn between his duty to protect her and the deep feelings he was beginning to realize he couldn't hide anymore. He wanted to keep her safe, more than anything, but now, he knew it wasn't just about protecting her. It was about fighting for her future, for the life she wanted, the life she deserved. The tension between them crackled, but there was something else there too. Something neither of them had admitted aloud, but both could feel. A connection, deeper than anything they had ever imagined. As they prepared for the battle ahead, Mark knew that the lines between duty and desire were blurring faster than he could handle. But one thing was clear, he would do whatever it took to protect Emma. Whatever it took. Stay tuned to see how Mark and Emma's dangerous game unfolds. Will Mark be able to protect her from the threats that surround them, or will the truth about their feelings change everything? Find out in the next part. In Part 3, The Bodyguard Who Fell for His Target's Sister, Part 4. Mark and Emma stood in the hallway, the weight of the conversation lingering in the air between them. Emma was determined to confront the man she believed was behind the attacks on her family, but Mark wasn't sure how far he should let her go. He had spent too many years living with walls around his heart, but with Emma, those walls were slowly crumbling, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. They made their way to the study, where Emma's brother, Henry, usually held meetings. The room was dimly lit, filled with the scent of expensive leather and old books. Emma stepped inside first, her back straight, her face set with resolve. Mark followed close behind, watching her every move, his instincts telling him that the worst was yet to come. Emma. A cold voice cut through the silence. Henry stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. What are you doing here? This is a business matter. You shouldn't be involved. He stepped further into the room, his eyes narrowing as they fell on Mark. Mark's jaw tightened. He knew this was a game, but now he was tangled in it too. He couldn't just stand by and let Emma be a pawn anymore. His loyalty to her was growing stronger with each passing day. I'm involved, Henry, Emma replied, her voice steady but with a hint of anger. I'm not some fragile little sister you can protect from the world. I know what's going on. I know about you and Spencer. You've been playing games with my life, and I won't let you anymore. Mark watched Henry closely, the tension thickening in the air. Henry's eyes flickered with something, annoyance, maybe guilt, but he quickly masked it with a cold smile. You're overreacting, Henry said, his voice dripping with condescension. You don't know the first thing about running a business. You think I'm doing this for my benefit? I'm doing it for the family, Emma. For all of us. Emma's eyes flashed with hurt and frustration. Don't try to make this about the family. You've been lying to me. You've been lying to everyone. Henry stepped closer, now just inches from her, his tone turning darker. You don't get to speak to me like that, he said. You think you can just waltz in and change everything? You're nothing but a child. Emma, I've been protecting this family while you were off playing with your art. And now you want to tear it all down. His voice was low, dangerous. Mark's blood boiled. He stepped forward, his body language tense. He knew Emma was about to lose her composure, and he couldn't let that happen. He had to protect her, not just from Henry, but from the world she was too naive to understand. Enough, Mark said, his voice firm, cutting through the tension. You can threaten her all you want, Henry, but I'm not backing down. If you want to hurt her, you'll have to go through me. Henry looked at Mark, his expression hardening. For a moment, there was a brief silence, and then Henry spoke again, his voice dripping with disdain. You think you can protect her? You're just a hired hand, Mark. You don't belong in this world. You're nothing more than a bodyguard, a pawn in this game. But Emma's different. She's part of something bigger. Emma flinched at the words, but Mark stood firm. The truth stung, but he wasn't going to let Henry tear her down anymore. Not while he was here. You're wrong, Mark replied, his voice steady but with an edge of defiance. She's not a pawn. She's not just a piece in your game. And I'm not just a bodyguard. There was a long, tense pause as both men stared each other down. Emma's breathing quickened as the weight of the situation seemed to press down on her. For the first time, she realized just how far things had gone. She wasn't just a woman caught in her brother's business. She was part of a world she couldn't escape from, a world that had been controlling her every move. And now, it was clear that the only way out was to fight. Mark glanced at her, his expression softening, and for a brief moment, she saw the man beneath the bodyguard. The man who cared. Let's get out of here, he said gently, his voice the calm in the storm. But Emma stood her ground. She wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. No. she said, her voice quiet but firm. I need to do this. I need to see this through. She turned back to Henry, her eyes filled with determination. Henry's eyes narrowed, his mask slipping for a moment. You think you can handle this? He sneered. You're not cut out for it. You never were. Emma's heart raced, but she took a deep breath, steadying herself. She wasn't going to let him break her again. Not now. She had Mark by her side, and for the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone. Before she could say anything more, Mark stepped forward, his protective instincts kicking in. We're done here, he said, his voice unwavering. If you want to play games, Henry, you can do it on your own. But Emma is out of it. He turned to Emma, his gaze softening. Let's go. They left the room, the tension of the moment hanging in the air, but something had shifted. Emma felt stronger, more sure of herself than she had in a long time. She was no longer just her brother's sister or someone caught in his world of business. She was Emma Parker, and she was ready to fight. As they walked down the hallway, Mark placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to do this alone. I'm with you, Emma. He said it quietly, but his words felt like a promise. Stay tuned as Emma and Mark's journey continues. Will they be able to take on the power of Henry and his manipulations? Or will Emma have to make a heartbreaking choice to save herself and those she loves? Find out next time. In Part 4, the bodyguard who fell for his target's sister. Part 5, as Mark and Emma walked out of the mansion, the weight of their conversation still hung heavily in the air. Emma's mind was racing, thoughts of her brother's betrayal and the dark secrets surrounding their family filling her with uncertainty. But one thing was clear. She couldn't run away from this. Not anymore. She was ready to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And with Mark by her side, she felt braver than ever. They headed to the car, the night air crisp against their skin. Emma slid into the passenger seat, her hands gripping the edge of her seat as she stared out the window, lost in thought. Mark sat in the driver's seat, his expression unreadable, but his eyes flickered to her every now and then, watching her carefully. What happens now? Emma asked softly, her voice breaking. The silence. What do we do next? Mark's gaze softened as he looked at her. For a brief moment, he hesitated. We fight, he said simply. We expose the truth. And we do it together. His words were steady, his tone filled with conviction. Emma nodded slowly, taking in his words. The plan had always seemed so out of reach, but now it felt like a possibility. The tension between them had shifted, not just from the chaos they had been pulled into, but from something deeper, something neither of them had dared to acknowledge until now. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she could face it. As they drove through the quiet streets, the city lights flickering past them, Emma found herself thinking about Henry, about the man he had become. The brother she once looked up to had now become someone unrecognizable, someone who would stop at nothing to protect his empire. But it was not just the empire she feared anymore. It was the man behind it. Henry had always been controlling, but now, he was dangerous. Emma couldn't trust him, not anymore. Mark, sensing her thoughts, spoke up again, his voice low but firm. Whatever happens, Emma, you're not alone in this. I'm here. I'll always be here. His words, simple as they were, made Emma's heart skip a beat. She had always known Mark was dedicated to his work, but now, she realized that his commitment wasn't just professional. It was personal. The car pulled up to a small, inconspicuous building, one that Emma had never noticed before. Mark parked the car and turned to her, his face serious. We need to go inside, he said. This is where we start. We can't wait any longer. We need to make sure we have all the facts before we confront him. Emma's heart raced as she stepped out of the car, her mind spinning with thoughts of what they would uncover. She followed Mark into the building, the coldness of the hallway a stark contrast to the warmth of the night air. They reached a door at the end of the hallway, and Mark knocked softly before entering, motioning for Emma to follow. Inside, a man in his late 30s looked up from his desk. His face was familiar, but Emma couldn't quite place him. Mark's presence seemed to calm the tension in the room. This is Tom, Mark introduced him. He's been helping me with some of the research into Henry's business dealings. We need to find everything we can about his partnerships, the ones that go beyond just business. Mark turned to Tom, his voice urgent. We need everything, no matter how small the detail is. Tom nodded and pulled out a stack of papers from his desk, spreading them across the table. This is all the information I could gather. Henry's latest deal is with someone named Spencer. They've been making some shady moves recently. I believe Spencer might be behind some of the threats against Emma. Tom's fingers pointed to a set of transactions, and Emma's stomach churned. This is just the beginning, Mark said, his voice steady but with an edge of concern. We have to be careful. If Henry finds out what we're doing, he'll stop at nothing to protect his empire. We need to act fast. Emma's mind was spinning. She had suspected something was off, but seeing it laid out in front of her was a harsh reality she couldn't ignore. Spencer, the business partner she had never trusted, was at the heart of everything. She had to confront him, and she knew she couldn't do it alone. Mark, Emma said quietly, her voice shaking slightly. I don't know if I'm ready for this. What if we can't stop him? What if he's too powerful? Her words were filled with fear, the uncertainty of the situation weighing heavily on her. Mark placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle but firm. We're not backing down, he said, his voice reassuring. You've already come this far. You're stronger than you think. And I'm not going anywhere. We'll face this together. The weight of his words sank in, and Emma felt a surge of determination. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of clarity. She couldn't run anymore. She had to face her brother, and the man who had betrayed her, head on. As they left the building, Mark's hand brushed against hers, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. The tension between them was palpable, but so was the unspoken understanding. Something was shifting between them, something neither of them could deny. But for now, the mission was clear. They had to stop Henry and Spencer, no matter the cost. Stay tuned as Mark and Emma's fight for the truth continues. Will they be able to take down the empire Henry has built? And will their growing feelings for each other interfere with their mission? Find out in the next part. In Part 5, the bodyguard who fell for his target's sister. Part 6, the following days felt like a blur to Emma. Every piece of the puzzle she and Mark were trying to put together seemed to lead them closer to a truth they weren't ready for. But there was no turning back now. The confrontation with her brother was inevitable. As Mark and Emma prepared to face Spencer, the business partner who had been orchestrating the chaos behind the scenes, the stakes couldn't have been higher. They sat in Mark's car outside a luxury hotel, the city lights casting long shadows across the pavement. Emma's hands were trembling as she gripped the seat, her eyes focused on the entrance of the hotel. She had never been more afraid, but at the same time, she couldn't help but feel a spark of resolve. This was it. This was the moment where everything would change. Mark, noticing her nerves, turned to her and gave a small, reassuring smile. You're not alone in this, he said quietly. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a hint of the same fear that she felt. It wasn't about just protecting her anymore. He was in this for the long haul, no matter the cost. I know, Emma whispered, taking a deep breath. But what if we're not ready for this? What if we can't expose Spencer and Henry's involvement? She glanced at him, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Mark's hand reached out and briefly squeezed hers, grounding her in the moment. We're ready, he said firmly. And we're not just doing this for you. We're doing it for everything you deserve. Your peace, your freedom. Whatever happens next, we face it together. The words hit her harder than she expected. It was no longer just about her brother or Spencer. It was about her future, and Mark was offering to help her rebuild it, no matter how difficult the path ahead might be. They both knew that Spencer wouldn't go down without a fight. The man was shrewd, manipulative, and dangerous. But Mark wasn't just any bodyguard. He was determined, and he wasn't going to let Spencer or anyone else take Emma's future away. As they entered the hotel, the weight of the situation became even more apparent. Every person they passed seemed like a potential threat. Emma could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to keep her pace steady, but every step felt heavier than the last. Mark, however, remained a rock at her side, his presence a constant source of strength. They arrived at the elevator, and as they waited for the doors to open, Emma felt a surge of anxiety. The plan was simple: confront Spencer, get the proof they needed, and escape before things escalated. But nothing about this felt simple. The closer they got to Spencer, the more Emma realized that her brother's empire had been built on manipulation and lies. And now, it was all about to unravel. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Mark stepped forward, motioning for Emma to follow. They walked down the long hallway, the tension between them palpable. Mark's hand subtly rested at the small of her back, guiding her forward. When they reached Spencer's suite, Mark knocked firmly on the door. There was no response at first, and then the sound of footsteps echoed from the other side. The door opened to reveal Spencer standing there, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he didn't speak, just stared at them with an air of cold superiority. "Emma," Spencer finally said, his voice laced with mock politeness. "I didn't expect you to be here. And with your bodyguard, no less." His eyes flickered to Mark, assessing him with a casual disdain. Mark stood tall, his presence commanding. "We're not here to make small talk," he said, his voice sharp. "We're here to get the truth." He stepped forward, and Emma followed his lead, her heart racing. Spencer's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly masked it with a confident grin. "The truth," Spencer repeated, raising an eyebrow. "What truth? You think you can just waltz in here and accuse me of something? You have no idea who you're dealing with." His tone was menacing, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Emma noticed it, and a small sense of triumph flickered in her chest. Emma took a deep breath, her voice steady. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. I know about the illegal transactions, the threats against my family, and your plans to destroy everything my brother built. You thought I was too naive to see it, but I know the truth." Her words came out with a force she didn't know she had. Spencer's expression shifted. For the first time, he seemed rattled. He stepped back, eyes narrowing. "You think you can ruin me?" he sneered. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." He reached for something on his desk, but before he could act, Mark was already moving. He stepped between Emma and Spencer, his body language signaling that he wasn't about to let anything happen. "It's over, Spencer," Mark said, his voice unwavering. "You're done. Your lies are over." He turned to Emma, his eyes softening with determination. "We have everything we need. It's time to end this." The weight of Mark's words settled in, and Emma felt a surge of relief. For the first time, she felt like she had control over her life again. As Spencer backed away, defeated, Emma turned to Mark, her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Mark's gaze softened, and he smiled gently. "You don't have to thank me," he said, his voice tender. "I promised I'd protect you. And I meant it." The fight wasn't over, but this was the turning point. With the truth finally out in the open, Emma knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But she wasn't alone anymore. She had Mark, and together, they would face whatever came next. Stay tuned for the next part of this story. Will Emma and Mark be able to bring down Spencer and take back control of her family's future? Find out in the next episode. In Part 6, The Bodyguard Who Fell for His Target's Sister. Part 7, the following days were filled with an uneasy calm. After the confrontation with Spencer, Mark and Emma knew they had only scratched the surface of the tangled web Henry had woven around them. Spencer's confession had given them the leverage they needed, but it wasn't enough. There was still the matter of Henry's involvement and the deeper secrets buried within his empire. Mark stayed close to Emma, watching her every move, sensing the emotional toll the events were taking on her. But despite everything, she remained determined. She wouldn't back down. Not now. They sat together in Mark's apartment that evening, the quiet hum of the city below them the only sound in the room. Emma stared at the papers scattered across the coffee table, the proof they had gathered about Spencer's illegal activities. Her mind was racing, calculating their next move. Mark could see the strain on her face, the weight of the world on her shoulders. He wanted to say something to reassure her, but he knew there were no easy words for this. After a long pause, Emma spoke, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "We can't let this go. Spencer isn't the only problem. My brother, Henry, he's not going to let us walk away from this. He's always been the one pulling the strings." Mark nodded, his expression grim. "I know. We'll have to go to the authorities with what we have, but it won't be easy. Henry has too much power, too many connections." He paused, leaning forward as he looked her in the eyes. "But we can't stop now. We're already too deep in this to back out." Emma looked down at the papers again, her fingers tracing the edges of the documents. The evidence was solid, but it wasn't enough to bring Henry down. She knew that. She had grown up in a world where power and money ruled everything, and now, she was learning just how far her brother would go to protect his empire. "I hate this," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "I hate what this has turned into. But I can't let Henry destroy everything, including me. I won't let him control me anymore." Mark reached out, his hand resting gently on hers. You don't have to do this alone, Emma. You never have to fight this fight on your own again. I'm with you. Always. His words were simple, but they carried more weight than anything he had said before. Emma looked up at him, her eyes softening, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe in something other than fear and betrayal. The doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. Mark tensed, his instincts kicking in, but Emma was already standing, moving toward the door. Mark followed close behind, his hand instinctively going to the gun hidden in his jacket, just in case. When Emma opened the door, she was greeted by an unexpected sight. Henry Parker, standing in the hallway with an unreadable expression on his face. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by a strange quietness. Emma, Henry said softly, his voice surprisingly calm. Can we talk? Mark stood a few steps behind her, his eyes narrowed, ready for anything. He wasn't sure if this was a trap, but he wasn't about to let his guard down. Emma hesitated for a moment, her gaze flickering between her brother and Mark. After what had happened, she wasn't sure what to expect from Henry anymore. But she couldn't avoid this conversation forever. Finally, she stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. Come in, she said quietly, her voice lacking the warmth it once held for him. Let's talk. But you'd better explain everything. Her words were firm, demanding answers. Henry stepped inside, glancing at Mark before taking a seat across from Emma. There was a moment of silence before he finally spoke, his tone measured. I know you're angry, Emma, he began. And I know you're confused. But everything I've done, I did it for us. For the family. You don't understand what's at stake. His eyes softened, almost pleading. You're not meant for this world. I never wanted you to be involved in this. But now that you are, I can't protect you the way I thought I could. You have to trust me. He sounded so much like the older brother she used to look up to that it almost made her heart ache. Emma stood frozen, her mind torn between the man she once trusted and the truth she had uncovered. She looked over at Mark, who was watching Henry closely, his eyes filled with skepticism. Mark's voice cut through the tension in the room. Trust you? After everything that's happened, after what we know about Spencer, you expect her to trust you? His words were sharp, laced with distrust. Henry's gaze flickered to Mark, his eyes narrowing, but he didn't respond right away. Emma could feel the weight of the conversation pressing down on her. Everything inside her was telling her to walk away, to not let her brother manipulate her any longer. But there was still a part of her that wanted to believe him. What do you want from me, Henry? Emma's voice was a mix of frustration and hurt. What's the next move? Henry hesitated, his face hardening. I want you to understand, Emma. I did what I had to do. But there's a bigger fight coming. A fight you can't win without me. Emma felt a chill run through her. This wasn't the brother she had once known. The walls around her heart grew higher with each word he spoke. Stay tuned to find out if Emma and Mark can trust Henry, or if this is just another game of manipulation. Will they be able to stop Henry's plans before it's too late? Find out in the next part. In Part 7, the bodyguard who fell for his target's sister. Part 8, the silence in the room was deafening. Emma stood facing her brother, Henry, who was still sitting with that cold, calculated expression. Mark stood behind her, his arms crossed, his body tense with the quiet intensity of the moment. Emma could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to process the words Henry had just spoken. He wanted her to trust him again. But how could she after everything that had happened? After the lies, the manipulation, and the danger he had put her in? Henry noticed her hesitation, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. Emma, he said softly, almost pleading, you don't understand. You've always been so far removed from this world, but now you're in the middle of it, and you don't have a choice. We're family. We need to stick together. His voice wavered slightly, but there was still that underlying arrogance, as if he truly believed she would fall in line. Emma's eyes narrowed. The words that had once been comforting now felt like chains. She could feel the walls around her heart growing thicker, harder to break down with every passing second. She looked over at Mark, who met her gaze with a look of steady reassurance. He wasn't going to let her fall back into this web of lies. Mark spoke up, his voice low but full of authority. Emma doesn't owe you anything, Henry. Not after everything you've done. She doesn't have to be a part of your empire or your plans. And neither do I. His tone was unwavering, and Emma could feel the heat of his support. Henry's jaw clenched. He stood up abruptly, his eyes flashing with anger. You think you can just walk away from this? His voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. You think this is just about some family drama? No, Emma, this is about survival. This is about keeping everything we've worked for intact. If you walk away now, everything falls apart. His gaze flickered to Mark. And you? He spat. You're just a bodyguard. You don't get to decide who stays and who goes. His words were full of venom, but Mark didn't flinch. Emma stood firm, her heart racing with anger and hurt. No, Henry. You've been controlling everything for too long. You've used me, manipulated me, and now you expect me to just follow along with your plans like nothing ever happened? Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't let it break her. I'm done being a pawn in your game. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision settle into her chest. I'm choosing my own path now, and I'm choosing to fight for the truth, not for your empire. Her words were final, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. Mark stepped forward, his hand resting on her shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. You're not alone in this, Emma. We'll make sure the truth comes out, no matter what it takes. His voice was steady, and Emma felt the warmth of his presence, the strength in his words. She looked at him, and for the first time, the fear that had been building in her chest started to dissipate. They could do this. Together. Henry's face twisted with fury, but he didn't speak. Instead, he turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the quiet apartment, and Emma felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't over, but she had made a choice. A choice to stand up for herself, to stop letting her brother dictate her life. And with Mark by her side, she felt like she could finally breathe. They stood in silence for a moment, the tension between them still palpable. Mark looked at her, his eyes softening. You did the right thing, he said quietly. You're stronger than you know. His words were simple, but they meant more to her than anything. Emma smiled faintly, the exhaustion from the past few days finally catching up with her. I don't feel strong, she admitted. But I'm trying. She glanced at the door where her brother had left, and then back at Mark. Thank you. For being here. For everything. Her voice trembled slightly, but she held her ground. Mark gave a small, reassuring smile. I'll always be here, Emma. You don't have to thank me. I'm not going anywhere. His voice was steady, a promise in his words. They stood there for a moment longer, the weight of everything still hanging between them. But now, for the first time in what felt like forever, Emma felt like she had control. She wasn't a victim of her family's secrets anymore. She was choosing her own future. And with Mark's support, she knew they could take down Henry's empire, piece by piece. Stay tuned to see how Emma and Mark continue their fight against Henry's empire. Will they be able to expose the truth before it's too late? And will their growing feelings for each other complicate their mission? Find out in the next part. In Part 8, the bodyguard who fell for his target's sister. Part 9, the days following Henry's departure were filled with uncertainty and fear, but also a strange sense of relief. Emma had made her choice. She wasn't going to be manipulated by her brother any longer. With Mark by her side, she knew the battle wasn't over, but they had the upper hand now. The evidence against Spencer was undeniable, and Henry's involvement in the illegal transactions was finally exposed. But Emma knew this was just the beginning. The war for her freedom, for the future she had always dreamed of, was far from finished. Mark had spent every moment since the confrontation with Henry preparing for the next step. They had to make sure they could bring everything to the authorities. They couldn't just rely on the evidence they had gathered. They needed more. But there was something in the air now, an undeniable tension between them, something that had been building for weeks but was finally about to come to the surface. Emma stood in the living room, staring out the window, the weight of everything that had happened pressing on her chest. She was no longer the innocent woman who had been hidden away in her brother's shadow. She was Emma Parker, someone who had the strength to fight back, who had found her voice. Mark walked up behind her, standing silently for a moment before speaking. We're almost there, Emma. We've got what we need. But we need to act fast. Spencer and Henry won't sit back for long. Emma nodded, her gaze still fixed on the city below. I know, she said softly. I'm not scared anymore. Whatever happens next, I can handle it. I have to. Mark stepped closer, his presence comforting and steady. He reached out, gently placing his hand on her shoulder, the touch light but full of meaning. You've already proven how strong you are. But remember, you don't have to do this alone. We'll face it together. I won't let you go through this by yourself. His voice was low, filled with a quiet sincerity that Emma hadn't heard from him before. For a moment, Emma closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. The reassurance in his voice was like a lifeline, pulling her from the fear and uncertainty that had clouded her mind for so long. She turned to face him, meeting his gaze. There was something in his eyes now, a raw honesty she hadn't seen before. It was as if he had finally let down his guard, just like she had. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I don't know what I would have done without you. You've been my strength, my anchor. You've always been there for me, even when I couldn't ask for it." Her heart ached with gratitude as she spoke, her feelings for him deeper than she had realized. Mark smiled softly, the weight of their journey clear in his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere, Emma. I'm here, for as long as you need me." His words were simple, but they were everything to her. In that moment, Emma knew she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for their future, for a chance at happiness, free from the shadows of her past. Later that night, as they prepared to present everything to the authorities, the tension between Emma and Mark was palpable. The final confrontation was inevitable. Spencer would try to weasel his way out of the truth, and Henry wouldn't go down without a fight. But Emma knew they had the power to take them down. With the evidence in hand and Mark's unwavering support, there was no way they would lose. The next morning, they walked into the police station, their faces set with determination. They were ready. The truth was finally going to be heard. And as Emma stood there, handing over the stack of documents that would expose everything, she realized that her life was about to change. For the first time, it felt like she was in control. As the officer took the papers, he looked up at Emma and Mark. "This is big," he said. "We'll make sure it's handled. You've done the right thing." There was a moment of silence as Emma processed the weight of his words. She had done it. She had exposed the truth. Back outside, Mark turned to her, his expression softening. "It's done. We've done it." His voice was full of pride, and Emma couldn't help but smile. The relief was overwhelming, but there was something else, too. A feeling that had been slowly growing between them. A connection that had only deepened through everything they had been through. Emma looked up at Mark, her heart racing. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark paused, his eyes meeting hers. "Now we start living, Emma. Now we move forward. Together." In that moment, Emma realized that the fight wasn't just about family or business. It was about love, trust, and the chance to build something real. And with Mark by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. Stay tuned for more. Will Emma and Mark's journey be smooth sailing from here on out, or will new challenges emerge? Find out in the next episode. In Part 9.